Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the Lord Ninja Choke MMA Picks podcast. I'm Dom, and I'm based in the US. I'm joined by Will from the UK and Josh in Australia. Today, we're going to be breaking down the UFC 316 card, Merab Dvalishvili versus Sean O'Malley. Before we do that, though, we're going to look back at our results, our pick results to date. So we've managed to get 12 out of 13 correct across the first 5 episodes of the podcast. So pretty good percentage. These are picks, as I mentioned, not bets. So a lot of short odds, but there are some notable close money odds. We had Gary in the first episode. He was minus 110. Who else did we have? We had Zahabi in episode 3, I think that was. He was plus 200 almost. And we had Jared Gordon, who was plus 100. And then a spate of minus 150s as well. So there was some decent picks here. And we're going to recap the very strange event from yesterday. I'll hand over to Will now.
Yeah, so the first thing that jumps out to me on this is I only lost 0.43 units, which I'm very happy with because this slate is disgusting. Obviously, I based quite a lot of my action for this card around Aaron Blanchfield, so obviously seeing that get cancelled right at the death was disappointing. Parlayed her with Rayan dos Santos, which is probably one of the worst bets I've ever made. Let's just not talk about that. Alan Nascimento, I was quite confident in him, which I think I spoke about a little bit on the podcast last week, but managed to pivot that to the plus 3.5 points handicap. It's not often you see a favourite with the plus version of the handicap, so I felt like it was much safer to capitalise on that. I drank the Kool-Aid on the injury and hospitalization of Ketlen Vieira and decided to back Macy Chasson as a result. That was an awful bet, some terrible fight IQ from her. And finally, I parlayed all 3 of our picks from last week, which is something I think I'm going to do going forward, just because I believe in these guys. But yeah, that came through, plus 163 for the double of Gamrot and Nascimento, which is pretty nice. So yeah, happy to get away with it, really, because I look back on that slate and I think that those are some atrocious bets overall. But yeah, sometimes dodging a bullet's all you need.
Yeah, I was similar to you. I had a lot of money staked on Erin, and so I was very disappointed about the Barber pullout. Managed to hit a couple of money lines this week. Gamrot was my pick from last week, and I really wish that I just backed myself a little bit more because I think the breakdown was pretty accurate and the read was right, but I was just scared about him potentially getting clipped. I think he kind of got clipped in the first round. He looked like he sat down at one point. The commentator didn't really make much of it. And then, yeah, Chiasson, that was a bad bet. Alan Nascimento was blind tailing you guys, really. So that was what really saved me from ending up minus 29%. Pretty similar to last week. So that's 2 weeks in a row. So really looking to turn things around on the next event. Over to you, Josh.
I mean, I'm not going to say I'm just disappointed because I'm not, but I will say that I'm disappointed in the fighters, which sounds shit because I'm not a fighter. They are. But the way that they fought, the way that Goff fought, the way that Lopez, well, not so much Lopez, but Chasson, terrible. I'm not even going to talk about the whole Dos Santos fight. That was boring, and I fell asleep. In terms of my locks, they're still hitting. Reese won. For some reason, that fight was also bad, as were a lot of these fights. Anyway, percentage my prediction accuracy hasn't really changed too much. It's still my personal best. It's still beating my previous best, which is 65.1%. So reasonably okay there, but otherwise not great. I wish I would have done better, but yeah. What can you do?
Yeah, this card is I'm really not that excited for this one at all. Obviously I'm very betting focused, and I personally don't think there's anything that jumps out at this stage in fight week on the money lines, and so I'm not really super excited about it for that reason alone. Also, I feel like it just sort of falls off a cliff, really. Like the main event's fun, but also who really asked for this rematch? I don't think it's necessary. No one really cares about the women's bantamweight title. And then after that, it's just a bunch of names that I guess deserve to be on a pay-per-view, but like there's not really any narratives here that I'm super excited about. So yeah, I could take or leave a lot of these fights, to be honest. It's better than watching an Apex card, but it's not really something I would want to pay money for.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I reckon there's going to be a lot of finishes. Looking at the names, I mean, Serghei versus Ju Sang Yu. Those guys are chaos in the bundle, so I expect to be a finish there. I don't know if Johnny Walker's fighting. I'm not up to date with the whole card situation, but if he is, he's going to get knocked out by Mirzakhanov. If he isn't, then Mirzakhanov's probably going to knock out the replacement guy. Joshua Van versus Bruno Silva, great fight. I'm a huge fan of Van. Kevin Holland, Luque. I mean, when it comes to namesake, looking at the card as a whole, it reminds me of a Apex pay-per-view, kind of like good names, but not really worthy of a huge arena or stadium kind of event. But yeah, I reckon we're in for a pretty good event in terms of finishes, highlight reels, and all that.
Yeah, so Johnny Walker is out and his replacement is Bredson Ribeiro. The Chaos Williams versus Medic fight is off, but Chaos Williams is fighting Gustafsson, who was meant to be on the card last night. And so those two will fight instead. And I'll be covering that. So not Williams Medic, but Williams Gustafsson. Over to Josh.
I have not much to say here. I'm basically relying on you two to kind of carry me a little bit here. But basically, what I really want to point out here is that O'Malley hasn't really fought since 306. We don't know what the frick he's going to be working on or improved on. Obviously, he's going to have better striking, But I don't think that in the time span of 306 to now that his counter wrestling has improved that much to counter Merab's bulldozing style. When it comes to Merab, I mean, he looked incredible against Umar. It shook the world, kind of like the UFC world, I guess. I like that he is getting more comfortable striking, but I also don't like that he's going to maybe strike against O'Malley. Like I feel like he might get too up himself in the fight, and he might risk a little too much against O'Malley. And I don't, that's never a great thing to see because we know that Dvalishvili has a pretty iffy chin, right? But yeah, most of this hangs on. Well, most of this fight, the whole narrative is how much has O'Malley improved since his last loss against Dvalishvili. And there is a bit of a talking point about how O'Malley's, he stopped smoking his stuff, he stopped doing this and that. And none of that really matters. I really couldn't give two shits. Because if you've been successful in your career up until this point, and then you change shit around, it's not going to matter. Like, you're still going to be hitting the same brick wall that is Dvalishvili. And you're still going to be getting asked the question, can he really defend the takedown after takedown? After takedown, Dvalishvili's style is very unique to the UFC. Most wrestlers who are good in the sport, they require very minimal takedowns to get the takedown, right? They take him down once per round and they keep him pinned down. Dvalishvili, 20 takedowns, 30 takedowns attempts, he doesn't care. So really, my pick, firstly, well, ultimately, is Dvalishvili. Obviously, I don't like O'Malley in this fight because I've never seen him fight after 36 until now. So yeah, that's my concern here. Like, it's a really weirdly made fight. Like, I don't think O'Malley deserves a spot in the title contention, and I just think Dvalishvili is gonna rinse and repeat what he did before. Wrestle, high pressure, maybe a few kisses here and there. That was a bit weird, but it it was great. But yeah, my pick here is Dvalishvili, and that pretty much sums up my ramble and yap. What about you guys?
Will, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I kind of looked at this fight via a very particular narrative. Something that I believe in quite heavily when it comes to MMA narratives is much more of a mental aspect. I'm basically just very distrusting of former champions who have recently been shut out of the title picture in a kind of like a passing of the torch kind of thing. I know it feels weird to say that about Sean O'Malley because he still is quite young and his reign was very short, but I think it's quite clear from watching that first fight against Merab that for as long as Merab is around, O'Malley is not going to touch gold. MMA is such a mental game as well as a physical one. I think it's so difficult to know that somebody else is getting comfortable on your throne and there's nothing you can do to get it back because you're just simply not good enough. It's a narrative that's existed in MMA forever. I know that there have been articles written about immediate rematches and the record of the former champion. I think it's something like 5-20 something in terms of like their actual records. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's basically like there's not a high likelihood that the one who lost last time and lost their belt wins a direct rematch. And I first like really kind of honed in on this one when Kamaru Usman had his trilogy fight against Leon Edwards. I thought that after that like headshot dead iconic moment, we'd never see Usman the same again. And given that he was ragdolling him for the first two fights, we saw that it was a massive regression. The same thing happened when Leon Edwards lost to Bilal. I think we saw that his wrestling was never going to be good enough to actually like compete at the top of the division. And then we saw the Sean Brady fight that happened soon after. Edwards looked massively regressed. Adesanya against Strickland, kind of similar, a little bit different in that Adesanya just didn't seem to have it anymore. And since then, we've seen his performances kind of fall off a cliff. Jamal Hill against Alex Pereira is a key one as well. I think Jamal Hill was kind of a bit of a paper champion. And as soon as, he got his throne taken by Pereira, it was pretty obvious that Jamal Hill's time in the title picture was gone. And most recently, Alexa Grasso. I think she also was a bit of a paper champion. And then once Valentina dominantly took the belt back, Grasso kind of looks at her career and goes, well, what have I got left to prove? What am I fighting for? Because I'm never going to have that highlight in my career. And I think all of that kind of applies to Sean O'Malley. I think his time in the conversation of being the champion of the bantamweight division is coming to an end. And it comes to an end with a loss here. And yeah, I just think also you mentioned, Josh, the narrative of like, Sean O'Malley's locked in, he's deleted social media, he's not smoking weed. That really plays into what I'm talking about. I just think it's a bit of an identity crisis. I think he's trying to desperately to clutch at straws and find some way to unlock this O'Malley 2.0 because 1.0 can't hack it. And yeah, I get, like you said, like, it worked for you for the first few years of your life. It was kind of a bit of a personality trait for O'Malley, but suddenly he wants to turn his back on it. Yeah, I just don't think he can stuff the takedowns. I don't think he can handle Merab's pressure. And I think Merab probably puts on a more dominant display than the last one. It was scored 3-2, I think, on the scorecards last time. It really should have been 4-1 for O'Malley. Sorry, for Merab. O'Malley can hurt him, though. Obviously, that's never off the table. But I just don't think we're going to get the best version of Sean O'Malley that we've ever seen. So it should just be another routine Merab win that probably goes the distance.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say against what you guys have already mentioned. I think the first thing to mention is that I think Merab is, like, for me, one of the best, most profitable fighters to bet on up until now, where he's obviously a big favourite. There's not much money to make from his money line, but I bet on him against Umar, and I think that was probably my single most profitable bet because he was like a 3-1, I think it was, underdog. I put like 3.5 units on him. So yeah, I understand what he brings to the table. He's relentless. He's going to get the takedowns, I think, in this fight, and he's already beaten O'Malley, so that's a good point about the psychological edge. I think the only thing maybe to ask you guys about, if I was going to sort of push back a little bit, is I know fighters always say they're injured, but I did try to do some digging on what the injury was and what he said it was and when he had it, and he said that 12 weeks out from the fight he had a labium, I think it was. He broke a labium. I don't know if it's a bone or a muscle. Anyway, he said that he was feeling like 8 weeks out, it was okay, but he could still feel it, and he didn't know whether he should fight or not. He said learning for him is, I think at that point he regarded himself as not having really lost, because he didn't, very famously doesn't think he lost the fight against Cheeto because of an injury. And I know he won the split against Peter Yan. People said he lost, but I mean, he on paper he won it. So until you lose, you don't really know what it feels like, right? So it's a learning curve, I guess, in that respect. So he said he was injured. Okay, maybe he wasn't, but maybe he's learned something. And I think the narrative about the champions thing, I definitely think it's a factor. I don't think it's about champions. I think it's more just a psychological edge of, this guy's already beaten me, and now I've got to fight him again. Oh, he's taking me down. Oh, well, this happened last time. That will be mentally wearing. But I just think all the other cases that you mentioned, the fighters were a little bit older, a little bit more washed. I think O'Malley is just entering his prime. If I'm not mistaken, he's not even 30. I don't know, the ages aren't on here, but I know Merab is like 34, 35. He's pretty old for a bantamweight. And so I think there's the possibility that O'Malley might look similar to the way he looked before. But he just seemed a bit tentative in the first fight. Well, I actually bet on O'Malley, to be completely honest. In that last fight, I just felt like the chin of Merab was a risk, but I was wrong. And I'm not holding out much hope that it looks differently this time. But I think it's kind of a dog or pass for me, in the sense that I think Merab is such a huge favourite. That's why I think a bet would have to be on O'Malley in some capacity, or just pass. But I don't know what you guys think about that aspect, that he might just look at this. So I've heard him and his coach, Tim Welch, talk about this, and they're kind of saying like, well, we see it as positive that, we're trying to take the positives from the loss. This is like an opportunity to learn, to grow. Of course, you're going to say these things, but that's the kind of thing I like to hear. So he's very intelligent. They're both pretty intelligent as fighters and trainers go. So they're not saying they're going to blow him away. They're saying they're going to do a better job. And if they're going to do a better job, then I'm happy to support that. But yeah, I'd like to know what you guys think about this fake or not fake injury, and just the trajectory of a fighter not yet in his prime. I don't think, I think age-wise, if you can confirm, I think it's 30, right?
I think he's around 30. Yeah, I mean, he's pretty young. But when it comes to the injury, I don't like hearing after the fight that they were injured. When it comes to a labral tear, I believe that's like a hip injury or something like that. So for someone like O'Malley to maybe get that tear from grappling or practicing a takedown defense, I feel like it could be a recurring injury now, because what else is he going to do to prepare for Dvalishvili, really? He's not going to, punch bags all the time. He's going to grapple. He's going to work on his takedown defense at the gym, and maybe reoccur that injury, make it more inflamed or something, if that is what happens, right? So I didn't really buy into the whole 12 weeks ago the injury happened and then I fought and lost deal. That's all bullshit yap from a guy that maybe has a bit of an ego problem. I hope he doesn't hear this, because he might kill me in my sleep. But yeah, I don't buy into that whole thing. Yeah.
I think they're all on a case by case basis, aren't they? I do think there is a distrusting of those kind of narratives that come up after the fact, because a lot of fighters must fight injured. I mean, we saw it with Merab. He literally went up against Umar with recent staph infection. Like, it only really is a factor if you lose and you need an excuse. So yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily buy it. Although, to be fair, though, I think on your response to what I said about the mental aspect for O'Malley, I do think that potentially there is maybe an angle there that he is younger, he is still figuring it out really at this level where he takes an actual loss, because there have been asterisks to any sort of like sketchy result that O'Malley has had in his career. So perhaps it was a case of all those other fighters I mentioned being sort of old and a little bit past it, and O'Malley could bridge that gap simply by having the ability to sort of, like, you know, learn new things in his prime. We will see, but I just can't see past Merab. Seeing how good he was in that Umar fight, I think he's here to stay at the top of the division until age gets him, really.
Yeah, he's the rightful favourite. I'm definitely not arguing against that. I think he should be the favourite. I just, from a betting perspective purely, I think O'Malley was at some point, and I think it's changed now, but he was touching like plus 300, you know, which I just felt was like quite wide. I think it's come in now a little bit, and I think that's just because of the popularity of Sean O'Malley, not because there are people looking at this analytically. And if people are just going to bet on Sean O'Malley because they're seeing plus money, and yeah, he's always got that puncher's chance, but yeah, I felt at some point it was too wide. I don't know. I think like plus 200 might be about right. I think we should see. I'm hoping to see a better performance. I just felt like something was off. That was just an intuition I had when I was watching the first time round. I just felt like he wasn't the Sean O'Malley that I'd seen fight before. He's very tentative. Of course, the fact that he's dealing with Merab is the reason he's tentative. But we have to see him throw a bit more. He just wasn't throwing at all. Yeah, and it could have just been because he's fighting Merab. And we'll see if he goes for a bit more. Hopefully he will. That will bring us on to my fight. So this was just thrown together. I only heard about this yesterday, so it's not even up on the UFC.com website. There's no UFC stats page for this fight. These two guys were scheduled to fight different people on different dates, and those fights fell out. So we have this now a new fight for 316, which is quite, I think, fan-friendly fight because Khaos Williams is basically a strong guy, big muscly guy, and Andreas Gustafsson, who's making his debut, is also like a tough guy kind of persona. So I think it should be a fan-friendly punch 'em up. But the one thing to note is that Andreas Gustafsson does not have any UFC fights. This is his debut, and he won his Dana White's Contender Series fight, and he seems to be he's fighting out of Sweden. He's kind of like a grappler. He likes to do a lot of cage pushing. He has a lot of power in his hands. He has a lot of finishes by ground and pound, I noted. I went back and watched some of his fights. He's lost only a couple of times. So even though he's 34, he's, I guess, a relatively young 34, only had 13 fights. Whereas Khaos, on the other hand, is 31, so he's definitely in his prime. And he's fought, 9 fights in the UFC. So there's a big experience gap. That's the main thing to note about their two resumes. Reach is in the favor of Khaos. He's got a 3-inch reach advantage, but they're both similar height. Like I said, physicality seems to be kind of similar from what I can tell from watching their fights. Khaos doesn't like to be grappled, doesn't like to be doing the clinching, likes to fight at range. So he uses his physicality to keep people away from him, off him. Unfortunately, that wasn't very successful when he fought Gabriel Bonfim in his last fight. He was submitted, but he wasn't looking too bad in that fight. The first round was close. The judges gave it to Bonfim. And I think Bonfim is a very talented striker and grappler, so I don't think that loss does him any harm. He's only lost to really, really accomplished UFC fighters. So he lost to Randy Brown in a split decision, and he lost to Michel Pereira. Those are his 3 losses. Now, okay, the Pereira one doesn't age so well, but I think Pereira was good when he fought Khaos. Khaos hasn't fought that many grapplers, to be honest. And I think that would be my main concern with this fight, is if Andreas Gustafsson can come out with a grapple-heavy game plan. But I just don't think he has really the background. He's not shooting a lot of takedowns in his fights. In his fights, he's doing a lot of cage pushing, a lot of dirty boxing. That's the kind of fight that Khaos doesn't want either. So Khaos wants to keep this at range, and he should use his length and his reach to try and win this fight. He's very live for a KO all the time. He's got a number of KOs, as they both have on their record. But like I say, Khaos's KOs and TKOs come from range, whereas Gustafsson's KOs come from being just like grindy and wearing on you. So I do have some concerns about backing Khaos here. But I think for me, the main difference and the reason I'm backing Khaos here is his resume and his experience in the UFC. 9 fights versus 0 fights. Another thing to mention is that if you look at the Gustafsson record, if you added up the wins and losses of all his opponents, it comes out something ridiculous like 120 wins to 180 losses. So it's like a negative differential. But that's because one fighter had like 80 losses that he fought. I don't even know how you get 80 mixed martial arts fights or losses. If you take away those outliers, though, it comes to about 120 wins, 80 losses. So he hasn't been fighting the highest level of competition outside of the UFC either. So I think even though he looked great on Dana White's Contender Series, and I'm sure that he would have had a good debut, I think this is a tough out for him, and I'm really struggling to see, him winning this fight. Although there are paths to victory, like I think I mentioned here the Bedoya fight. I think Khaos Williams just completely complacent in that fight. Bedoya came in at short notice. He's not really a welterweight. He actually gone down to lightweight now and fought Jai Herbert in his last fight. So I'm willing to discount that one fight, but most of Khaos's fights have been of good quality. He seems to have decent, fight IQ. Well, not fight IQ. He's got decent skills everywhere, but that's very similar to Gustafsson. They're both, similar in that respect. I just think that the experience gap is why I'm going to back Khaos. Guys, do you see any flaws in my logic? Am I thinking here? Any pushback?
I got nothing really to add there. I'm sure you covered all of it, like really. But my main concern for Gustafsson is that he's 34 and he's making his debut in the UFC. Like that's a bit old, and not to sound too ageist here, but isn't like a fighter's prime year in the 20s, and he's making his debut. It's a bit weird. But when it comes to this matchup, I think that Khaos Williams is a much more, for lack of a better way to explain it, a more dangerous version of Trevin Giles, who Gustafsson was meant to face today or last night. I reckon we're going to see Williams probably bully him because of his physicality. But then again, there are so many unknowns to a debuting fighter like Gustafsson, so I might lean Williams in my write-up. Like I still got to research this, but yeah, it's one of those fights where it's like so haphazardly made up and so quickly put together that it's hard to really assess. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm also not as knowledgeable about this fight as I probably should be at this stage. But I think, to be honest, when you look at Khaos Williams's UFC stats page, the sort of plethora of names that he's fought really does kind of like paint a picture of how you can imagine this fight going. As a little aside, it's quite impressive that his strength of schedule for like prelim level is so strong, considering like there are so many people in the UFC that don't really deserve to be there anymore. All of his competition is pretty tough, but that kind of just demonstrates like further why this should be an easier fight for him, because we've seen him lose against sort of specialists or people who have just like a slight edge on him in terms of some skill set. Obviously, the Bonfim fight was kind of a demonstration of that. The Randy Brown fight, Randy's a very good minute winner with his long reach. But to me, from watching Gustafsson tape in the last couple of weeks for his bouts that have fallen through, he seems like a jack of all trades and a master in none, and somebody who his ability to be chaotic, pardon the pun here, but also add in, just high variance danger moments because of how much he pushes a pace, that will carry you so far. But I think coming up against a guy like Khaos Williams, that also will get you in trouble, because Gustafsson was quite hittable. And yeah, I'm not 100% sure I really think that his style is going to go a long way in the UFC. And I think comparative to the level of competition that Khaos has fought, if he's able to go to a very competitive point striking affair against Randy Brown and also Rolando Bedoya, who I think has actually looked quite good in that Jai Herbert fight, but also Williams has the potential to KO his opponents like Carlston Harris and Abdul Razak Al Hassan. I think that if Gustafsson fights in the way that he wants to and wants to turn this one into a close encountered brawl, I think he's just going up against a guy who is probably a more proven finisher and is more dangerous. So I just think that Gustafsson's just going to like run headfirst into a wall here. But having said all that, that Rolando Bedoya fight, whilst I do think it's aged okay, I really didn't like what I saw, and it really did stay in my memory. Like you said, Dom, I think he was just complacent there, and he just didn't take it seriously. I remember, like, on the betting line, he was like minus 500 or something. Like, it was definitely like a quote unquote foregone conclusion that he was going to win that fight, and he didn't respect his opponent, and that's kind of left us a bad taste in the mouth. So honestly, the idea of like backing Khaos Williams at minus 200 doesn't really fill me with confidence. But I think if you were to take away that kind of preconceived negative opinion of him, stylistically, this really should be a fight where he shines, because I think he's just going to have an answer for whatever Gustafsson brings his way.
Yeah, I think you guys have added some nice colour there, and I think if you could just take away the Bedoya fight, I'd feel supremely confident in Khaos. But that one fight demonstrated quite low fight IQ. He was like going for like really energetic bursts early rounds to try and get the guy out of there, and he kind of like gassed out a bit, and Bedoya took over in the late rounds. So yeah, I think there is a path to victory for Gustafsson. I don't know how I cap it. Like, he's just got to like outwork and wear out kind of a younger, physically more gifted fighter, which seems very slim. So I thought without the Bedoya fight there, I thought minus 200 would kind of leave some value on the table. But because I've got that doubt about his fight IQ, he really needs to keep Gustafsson at range, and he'll make this look fairly comfortable. But if he lets him hold him up against the cage, take him to the mat or anything like that, that's the way that Gustafsson can win this. But it's a slim chance, I think.
Cool. So the fight I'm looking at is Serghei Spivac versus Waldo Cortes Acosta, which may surprise some people because I am always dunking on heavyweight MMA and talking about how rubbish it is. The fact that this is the fight that I'm looking at, and also will be betting on, kind of demonstrates just how awful I think this card is from a betting perspective. A reason that this fight is kind of interesting, though, is that the odds have been shifting massively in the last few days. I believe Spivac opened at around minus 175 or 1.57 for decimal odds, and it's now moved down to around minus 125 because people like Waldo Cortes Acosta here. I simply just don't think that that's right. And I think that the line movement that has continued has kind of opened up an opportunity to bet on Serghei Spivac here. And it all just comes down to what you see on tape. Obviously, this is a very striker versus grappler binary kind of matchup. But Serghei Spivac is a guy you can rely on to play his role in that fight. He knows that he's the grappler, and he's faced so many of these plodding, heavy-hitting, overweight guys in his time, and he's gotten the better of pretty much all of them. He's going to take you down. He's going to maintain as much time on top and not give you that opportunity to hit him hard on the feet, because he knows he probably will get finished. He's done that against Derek Lewis. He's done that against Taito Ivasa. He's done that against Augusto Sakai. He's done that against Greg Hardy. Obviously, those names get worse and worse and worse, but Greg Hardy can knock you out. Greg Hardy could knock out Serghei Spivac if they were fighting on the feet for long enough, but Spivac knew what the mission was and executed it perfectly. To be honest, I think you can be quite impressed by the performances of both against both the like of Tuivasa, Greg Hardy, and Derek Lewis, because he went out there and did exactly what you would expect a grappler at heavyweight to do. And so often you see guys who go up against power punchers and they know they're inferior on the feet, and they'll just stick around there and they'll lose as a result. And it's insane how low the fight IQ can be. So listing off Spivac's wins, if you look at his losses, his recent losses at least, because I do think Spivac has evolved quite a lot since he's been in the UFC. You got Gelton Almeida, who is obviously a very high-level grappler, probably a better grappler on the mat than Spivac, so he kind of couldn't use Plan A, which makes it a nightmare fight for him. Cyril Gann, who is speed and footwork based, very hard to therefore take down, because you can't get a hold of him and actually get your entries going off the bat. And Tom Aspinall, who also has similar traits in that regard, who's very speed-based and also hits quite hard. So those are three nightmare matchups for him, but also the level of like competition I'm talking about there. That's a former champion, the current interim champion, and a guy who probably should compete for a belt one day. Like those are three of the top five, I think, in the division. Like, you know, there's no shame in losing to those guys. So when you cross-reference that to Waldo Cortes Acosta, which group of the names that I've listed does he fit in? He definitely fits in with the Lewis, Tuivasa, Sakai, and Hardys of the world, because that's his style. That's also his level. And when you analyze Waldo Cortes Acosta, his strength of schedule is night and day to Spivac. His best wins are either Lucas Brzezicki or Andrei Arlovski. And it gets worse when you actually like go in and look at those fights, because he's never fought a grappler like Spivac. The only fight you can ever really sort of take and make comparisons to and look at the way he handles grappling was against Marcus Rogerio de Lima. And de Lima is a bit of a flawed fighter. He doesn't have very good fight IQ. He can grapple, but he's not very good at maintaining top position or even actually executing his takedown, as far as I remember. But he landed multiple takedowns on Waldo Cortes Acosta and was able to control the first 2 rounds of the fight just by rinse and repeating takedowns. In fairness to Waldo, he did get up again, but I think that was mostly because Marcus Rogerio de Lima doesn't really have a very good ability to consolidate a position once he gets the fight to the floor. From watching that fight back, those first 2 rounds specifically, it just made me ask myself, if this is what de Lima can do, what can Spivac do? And there's so much potential there, and all of it is good in Spivac's favor. So it really just is simply a case of, this is a striker versus grappler affair, but I think that one guy is so much better at executing their game plan versus their opponent defending it. Like, I know the risks. It's pretty obvious that if they get stuck on the feet and Waldo can defend the takedowns, then Spivac's going to get butchered and he's going to lose. And he has to be careful with his entries. But you could say that about all of those fighters that I mentioned that Spivac's already beaten. And he won those fights very convincingly and very easily. So yeah, I don't really know what the general public likes so much about Waldo Cortes Acosta here. It kind of baffles me a little bit. It doesn't look like a -125, which is where Serghei Spivac currently is. So, at heavyweight MMA, I know there are risks, and I don't think you can ever call a heavyweight fighter a quote-unquote lock, and this definitely is not one of those times. But if you can think of MMA betting like investing, I think that Serghei Spivac's stock is currently far lower than it should be, and I think that there's a strong chance that he makes money if you invest on him. So Serghei Spivac is definitely the side you should be betting at -125, and that's the side I'm going to be betting.
Yeah, and I've just noticed that he's got an 8-inch reach advantage. I hadn't realised that there was such a big disparity, but that would be helpful at trying to sort of fend off Waldo's onslaught. I imagine at some point he's going to be throwing quite heavy on the feet, because he knows, he's going to have limited minutes to win this fight. And listening to you talk, I agree with your assessment. Actually, the only thing I was thinking of, the only thing you said, which made me wonder, was you said he's kind of in the camp of
Derek Lewis.
Yeah, I think probably not exactly the same as Derek Lewis, because Lewis is a unique fighter. He doesn't really throw much and then just knocks people out. Maybe like Serghei, I could see that. Greg Hardy, he's useless, isn't he? So maybe like Serghei. I think Waldo's got fast hands, so that's one thing I remember about him. He's got pretty decent hands. Doesn't kick at all, so that's helpful for fighting someone who's going to try and take you down. I'm just trying to think of points that might playing devil's advocate here, because I was pretty convinced by what you said. I just think, Spivac's fought much better competition and beaten much better people. And Waldo, I think the public like his record, 13-1. They get short-term memory. He knocked out Ryan Spann. He only got 2 knockouts as well. So a good thing I was thinking is the Spivac angle. He's usually losing to people who are going to knock him out pretty quickly. And Waldo's not that. He's going to give you 3 rounds to work with. And I think Spivac needs one takedown to finish this. So even if he doesn't get it down in the first round, which I suspect he will, because Waldo was taken down by Chase Sherman. So I'm feeling pretty confident in Spivac as well. I was just trying to think of any angles for Waldo. Confidence, sorry. So Spivac's lost 2 out of his last 3 fights, right? So there might be a confidence issue. Sometimes Spivac looks like someone who needs confidence, if you know what I mean. Waldo is just all bravado. This kind of guy who will showboat even when he's lost 3 rounds, right? It's really annoying people like that. Just reminds me, I was watching the Randy Brown versus Khaos Williams fight, and it was a close fight, and Randy Brown was showboating, and then Williams just clocked him one in the face. There's nothing more satisfying when that happens. It's like, get on with the fight. Don't showboat unless you're really, really, Actually, don't showboat at all. I think it's not good sportsmanship. But back to this fight, I'm with Spivac. Actually, I'm feeling that, especially with the betting line, I think you're right. It doesn't make sense to me, because this is pretty binary. If this fight goes to the mat, Waldo is in a world of trouble. He hasn't fought anyone of Spivac's quality. to be grounded by Rogerio de Lima. If he got taken out 3 times, and then it was just lay and pray, I think, because he's not very lethal. Spivac's lethal on the ground. Josh, do you have anything additional?
Yeah, you mentioned that the 8-inch reach advantage for Spivac would help defensively. I agree, first of all, but I also think that it would help offensively, being a wrestler. If Waldo Cortes Acosta has the ability to dig for underhooks or go for a 50-50 position, Spivac's length is going to help maintain a stronger hold, I guess, if you want to call it that. When it comes to heavyweights, though, as a fellow fat fuck, I believe that this is a highlight for me on this card because I love Spivac. Like, I'm going to make him a lock, even though Will said that maybe he won't. Like, I'm going to just, out of spite, just say, yeah, I'll make him a lock. But, yeah, I reckon this is going to be pretty one-sided outside of maybe a rough KO chance from Cortes Acosta. But, yeah, Spivac should have this one.
Well, it sounds like we're all leaning the same way. And what are the odds doing in this fight? Which direction are they going? Because we're going to talk about betting in a minute, so I just want to check. It seems like the money's coming in on Waldo, like you said. So, but not by much. It's not moving a lot. He opened -140, is now -132.
Yeah, it's been going back and forth. I think there's definitely been like steady Waldo money in the last week, which has pushed Spivac down from like, I think it was like -175. But honestly, I think there is going to come a point where it hits a wall. Like, I don't think you can have Spivac at plus money. So I think that there are a lot of people like myself who haven't bet Spivac yet, but are definitely eyeing it up. So I think what we are waiting for is for like it to hit -120. I think if it was to hit -120, it would immediately shoot back up again to -130. So it's whether or not you actually can like time it right and get that as it bounces before it goes back up again. But I don't think it goes any further than -120. But yeah, looking at my bets for this card, it's funny really because I obviously for the O'Malley discussion, I spent the whole time just dunking on the guy and talking about how I didn't think mentally he'd be there. But here we are with a 5-unit bet. It's not a confident one, but I think it's a risk averse one, so that explains the large quantity. So yeah, scorecards no action. For those who don't know, this market means that if Sean O'Malley wins by a finish, I win, and if Merab wins by a finish, I lose. But if it goes the distance, all bets are void. So the only way I will lose this bet is if Merab Dvalishvili finishes Sean O'Malley. And hopefully you can agree with me that that feels like a very unlikely thing. On the other hand, O'Malley finishing Merab, I personally don't think he will, but I think that it's on the table. And I think, we saw from that 5th round, the round where the least amount of finishes occur, we saw that he still has it in him, and he did hurt Merab. And with a few good bits of luck, there's potential that O'Malley could get a finish. I'm fully expecting to just get my money back on that 5 units, but at the end of the day, I think +132 is a bet everybody should be making, because I think the investment potential there is amazing. And I've shouted about it from the rooftops, so I really hope Merab doesn't finish, because that'll be quite embarrassing. Elsewhere, I'm on Kevin Holland for 3 units. I got this at -160 because I do all my work like a week or 2 in advance. I knew that line would get a lot heavier on the Kevin Holland side, because Vicente Luque is a lot more washed than his current record demonstrates, because he won his last fight. But that was kind of an outlier and also not a relevant one to this fight. So I kind of put 3 units down on that without doing any tape. And the tape that I've watched since confirmed that that's a good bet. So very happy with that. I've already spoken about Spivac. I haven't placed it yet. I'm waiting for -120. Hopefully it does get there, but I will take -125, -130 if it comes. And Kale Harrison inside the distance. I do need to do a little bit more research on this one, but I think that Juliana Pena has a real capability to just have mental lapses in concentration. I'll never forget her getting submitted by, Dutch kickboxer Geraint Durandamy. So I personally think that if Harrison is going to have all the top control time that we expect her to, she should eventually grind her way to finding the opening to getting a finish. I also think that given that it's women's MMA, there's potential for the odds on that to be like a lot more generous than they should be. It's all price dependent. No, I wouldn't bet it if it wasn't at least plus 150. So we will see. But that's probably the entire slate for me on this card. It's not really got a whole lot of betting options outside of what I've already got.
Yeah, as I mentioned to you already, I think that's great value on the scorecard no action O'Malley play. If I could get that, I'll wait to see what it drops on Bet Online. I definitely would tail that. Kevin Holland versus Luque. I was going to break that one down for my pick, but I just thought I don't want to do that. I don't like watching back Luque and Holland fights generally because I find them, some of the Holland ones are okay. The Luque ones, yeah, I know them both very well, so I didn't look into it too much. I think you already mentioned that having a lot of faith in Kevin Holland is dangerous because he's welterweight Kevin Holland seems to be a bit more serious approach to the game than middleweight Kevin Holland, but you never know what you're going to get. But like you said, Luque is definitely washed and he's got the brain bleed issue, so I can see why he took that punt, and I think money's coming on the Holland side. The Kayla Harrison one, I like that. I haven't really thought much about that. I wouldn't thought how to attack that. I wonder if Kayla Harrison inside rounds 1, 2, or 3 might be another way to look at it. I don't know what her finishing upside would be in rounds 4 or 5, given that she couldn't finish Ketlen Vieira, which is not, there's nothing against Ketlen Vieira, but I'm just wondering, if she's going to reach rounds 4 and 5, what would she look like? Maybe she'll look a bit gassy, but just something to think about. From my side, yeah, I shot in on Chaos Williams early as soon as that dropped. I'm not so confident anymore. I wish it was more like 1 unit, but I don't have the cash out ability on Bet Online, so I'm stuck with the 2 units now. I feel pretty confident that he'll get it done, but like I say, I wish I'd stayed maybe 1 unit, but it's done now. I had Kong Wang parlayed with 2 different fighters, Azmat Mozarkanov and Erin Blanchfield, so both those fights fell out. So now I'm 2 units on Kong Wang for very little profit, which doesn't make me feel great, but I know her opponent, what's her opponent's name? I've forgotten now. Lipsky. Lipsky is not really, her head's not really been in the game much recently. She's had some very poor performances, so hoping Kong Wang can continue streaking. But yeah, not overly confident in either of those bets. I'd prefer if they were lower amounts, but I can't cash them out. Sean O'Malley, like I said, I just felt like the line was quite good on this one, even though his only chance of really probably winning this is a KO. Points, I can't see how he can win on points, so that's why I took the KO, a small sprinkle on the KO at 6-1 or 6. And yeah, interest maybe in Kong inside the distance, because Lipsky's not going to be, I don't think she'd be very successful in taking Kong down. I think Kong's got a lot of finishing upside, so if it was like plus 200 or more, I'd be interested in that. Josh?
Well, mine's always really, really short and sweet, I guess. Merab moneyline, because I am going to make Merab a lock. You'll see that in my write-up on Wednesday or Thursday, depending on what or how long this write-up will take. For my 2-man parlay, which is going to be maybe a tradition for this podcast that I try and stick with, Van KO, because Van's money line is like minus 500 or something really, really crap like that. So I figure the KO would be, I don't know, maybe minus 200. That's Will's domain. Maybe he can answer that. But Spivac money line will be the second leg. And yeah, as I always say, Wednesday is when I post my stuff, and Wednesday is when I pretty much place my bets. You'll see all my parlay suggestions, my locks, and my alt bets, whatever, on my Reddit post on Wednesday.
Cool. Let's see what we've got next. We've got the betting challenge that we're doing. So our main bet for last week fell off. Erin Blanchfield didn't get to fight, so we still have that $100, and we have the profit from the 50 on the Nascimento. So our current balance is 129.98, and yeah, I think I feel pretty confident now that all 3 of us are aligned on Spivac. And even though the best thing to do is to wait, of course, to see where the line goes, because I think we could get minus 120 as Will suggested. But since this is in the interest of the episode, I think we can agree to put some money on Spivac now.
Yeah, I think we're catching it at a good time anyway. I don't expect it to get a whole lot better than minus 125. I think, the minus 120 is me kind of being a bit greedy. I really should pull the trigger at minus 125. But I think it could bounce back and go up to like minus 150, minus 160 at the blink of an eye at some point in the next 24 hours. I think it's very likely to do that.
No, like I said, I looked at this earlier. It was minus 115. So that's interesting, isn't it? So some money has come in on Spivac at this price. So maybe we should just get in on it. And what are we saying? $50, half a unit?
Yeah, half a unit, I reckon.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. If we lose this, we'll still be on $80. Bang, done.
If we lose it, come on, we're not going to lose it.
We've got a pretty good track record, but we were saying like it's almost too good to be true. So we're going to expect some regression maybe, but let's see if we can keep it up. We've got good rate in our picks, very very high percentage.
All right, so that now brings us to the Fireside chat segment of the podcast, where we take a question or two and just sort of discuss it to get more of a feel for the general climate of MMA at the moment. If anyone has any ideas for future topics for us to discuss, please leave them in the comment section. That would be great, because we are sort of trialing different ideas, but we're not too sure what to go with long term. But this week, the first question we're looking at is, which fighter would you most like to meet and why? So does anyone have any names that fly off the bat off the top of their heads?
Dom, you want to take this one first?
Well, I mean, it's an obvious choice, but for the wrong reasons. I'd like to meet John Jones just to ask him what the hell he's doing, but that's a kind of negative one, isn't it? Really, I think this was intended to be probably a positive question. Like, I can't say that. I think I'd like to meet maybe like Mike Bisping, because he's British, and I'd just like to ask him about how the UFC's changed since he was quite an early pioneer of the sport, and certainly one of the ones that popularized MMA in the UK. I think that would be an interesting conversation. I think MMA has definitely evolved. He was basically like a brawler, like a street fighter, but was quite technical as well. So yeah, I'd like to get his opinion on what's happened at the grassroots level in the UK, or what's not happened. I think that the UK has come along a long way, and I think that would be a good conversation to have. Do you guys have any fighters in mind?
I mean, my answer to this is Robert Whittaker. Those that read my stuff or read my write-ups for all these years know that I'm a huge Whittaker fan. But I would most like to meet him for like a gaming session, really. I mean, whenever you see him on social media, he's like promoting all these Bethesda games like Fallout 76, Elder Scrolls Online, games that I play, really. So it's not so much of a UFC or a MMA-based meetup. It's just going to be just us chilling, hopefully, But yeah, Rob Whittaker, that's my guy. If he hears this by any chance, hit me up, please. Will, what do you got?
I just want to say I do absolutely love that video. Have you seen it where a reporter asks what Robert Whittaker thinks of what's his name? Josh Emmett being re-nicknamed as the Fighting Fulmer because he looks like one of the enemies in Skyrim, and he absolutely loses it. Brilliant video. Check that out.
That's great.
And also on Dom's point, I have met Michael Bisping. I met Michael Bisping at a book signing in Manchester in 2020 when he was doing book signing for, I think it was called Quitters Never Win or something. I got 20 seconds to talk to him, and I said thank you to him because he won the belt in 2016 when I was at university and I was struggling financially. It was way before I had any idea about money management, and it's not something I recommend at all. But I put probably about half the money I had in my bank account, which was not much, I don't know, what, 20 pounds, I think, on him to beat Luke Rockhold, just because, UK solidarity. And he got me by until my next paycheck. So I told him that, and he called me a degenerate, and here we are. So that's a lovely story.
That's hilarious. I have the same book, actually, Quitters Never Win, or whatever it's called, and I'm not a big reader, but I read that book in about 2 hours.
Yeah, I read it as well. I unfortunately lost it, so I don't have my signed copy anymore, but I have read it and it is very good. But to answer the question itself, I think my two choices would be either Daniel Cormier, because I do just think he's great vibes. He gets a lot of hate from a commentary perspective, but I really enjoy the angle he brings to the fights. He makes me laugh quite a lot when I'm watching tape or when I'm watching the broadcast itself. So I think DC would be a great guy to hang out with. And alternatively, I would say Angela Hill, because Angela Hill is a woman that I just have so much love for. I think she has such a great energy. I sometimes listen to her podcasts that she does. I also think she's had such a great career in women's MMA. She's such a staple part of the journey that the UFC has had with women's MMA. And I think it would be really cool to sort of hear about her experience and hear about her opinions on a lot of the split decision robberies that she's suffered in her career. Yeah, I think Angela Hill would be a great person to have a chat with and hang out with one time.
I love the DC. Yeah, that was a great call. Do you remember when DC and Dominic Cruz had their fallout because Dominic Cruz said DC doesn't do any research for his commentary? That was quite a funny. I can't remember if it was like a segment or like a few videos, but there was something that went on where basically Dominic Cruz he's quite studious, isn't he? He's quite into the game, and he was annoyed at DC because he never did any research.
Yeah, he accused him of having somebody that he paid to do the research for him and give him the cliff notes, I think, which is quite funny. But to be fair, it must be rough doing tape. Sometimes you'll hear Paul Felder being like, "Oh, I remember watching this guy's regional fight," and it's like, Paul, come on, man, do you have to do that? That sounds brutal.
The other question we have here: Elite Wrestling, is it still the best base for MMA? What do you guys think?
Will, you want to take this one first, or you want me to go?
Yeah, I'll have a look.
All right.
I think it really depends on your grappling alongside it, because wrestling is great, but if you do nothing with it or your opponent gets back up straight away, it's worthless now. I think I get into the fine details of getting angry about the way that MMA is scored quite frequently on Discord and other platforms, because this whole conversation about damage and fight ending intent, I think really has done wrestling and grappling a disservice. And I think that it's really being put as a secondary skill set these days, which I think is just not fair. I think that if people were to think a little bit more about the defensive part of MMA, it's what Joe Rogan always says. If you have a wrestler who keeps landing takedowns, it's on the opponent to get up. We saw that with the Macy Chasson fight last night. Ketlin Vieira didn't do much at all, really, with the top control time that she had, but she just, she had that fight won from the moment that first takedown was landed, because you could tell that her opponent could not get up. So I think it can be elite. And it can be the best base, because you can be the best striker in the world, but what strikes are you landing from on your back? But it has to be coupled with good top control these days, because a high volume of takedowns that result in absolutely nothing can be eradicated by one or two good punches from your opponent. So yeah, contextually it matters, I guess.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like there's very few champions in the UFC these days that don't have elite ground games. I think Adesanya was one of the long reigning champions. I think it was quite an outlier that he just didn't have any wrestling ability. Okay, he took Alex Pereira down, but other than that, it's fair to say all his fights were just him running away and point fighting or knocking people out, to be fair. So I think it is still the best base, provided, like you say, you have added to it, like Makachev, Sean Brady come to mind. They have great wrestling. I think, you need to have that. I think, someone like Ian Gary, it's going to be interesting. I think when he comes up against a good wrestler, he doesn't have elite wrestling as a base, but he seems to be doing pretty well without it. Maybe he's an outlier like Adesanya. I don't know, Josh. What do you think about this question?
I don't think that elite wrestling is the best base anymore. I reckon times have changed, and we are seeing more prominent boxers become champions. I mean, we saw it recently with JDM. He has great takedown defense, and he absolutely demolished Bilal on the feet. That's probably going to be a recurring theme when it comes to big fights. Like if a guy has a or girl, if they have a better boxing base, they're going to be winning the fight because it's easier to defend takedowns than it is for a wrestler to learn how to strike, I reckon. Because all a wrestler does when they learn to strike is they throw maybe a couple of strikes and then level change. Whereas defensively for a boxer, it's more be aware of the level change, but keep the fight standing. Keep moving your feet, keep doing L stepping and all that stuff. So I don't think that elite wrestling is the best base anymore. Maybe 10 years ago, sure, but the evolution of the sport really has changed, and I reckon boxing, not kickboxing, but boxing by itself, is now the best base for MMA, which is weird because I mean, like back in the day, you'd hear Joe Rogan debate a boxer or a boxing person about MMA, and I reckon now the script has flipped a bit.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking, actually, I was wondering to myself, because I get where you're coming from, and I think that's why we're having the discussion, friendly disagreement. I think JDM is a great outlier as well, because I guess we're going to find out how good, whether he needs elite wrestling or not when he fights Makhachev, right? I think the line is at the moment in favor of Makhachev, so that's suggesting that wrestling will be an important factor, and probably leaning towards Makhachev. I think JDM has a great chance of winning that. I don't really understand Makhachev being a big favorite in that fight. I think that you can have good boxing and win fights, but if you don't have wrestling in your back pocket, you'll eventually be exposed. I think JDM has elite takedown defense. That's his kind of his counter to that. I don't think many fighters. I mean, Adesanya had elite takedown defense as well, until recently. I think was he taken down by Dricus? I think he was, but I think maybe he was hit first. So yeah, I don't know. Will, what do you think about the Makhachev fight with JDM? Who would you favor in that?
I don't know. I think Makhachev should still be favored, but there's just asterisks, isn't there? Like Makhachev moving up in weight, JDM also. I'm still not convinced that his takedown defense is amazing. Like he struggled. I mean, the takedown defense itself is not great. The get-ups are very good, but what if the get-ups aren't contextually always good? Because I still feel like we would shitting on his inability to grapple up until the Gilbert Burns fight, and then suddenly it was like, oh, okay, he actually has figured out part two. He gets taken down a lot, but he can defend it. But then the Bilal fight, we didn't really see too much of it, more so because Bilal didn't really try to implement it as much as he should have. And I'm not so sure if the takeaway from that Bilal fight was that Bilal fought a curious game plan as opposed to JDM had all the answers to the takedown attempts. I have a memory of a goldfish, so I would have to go and rewatch that, or at least look at the stats to check that I haven't just chatted absolute bollocks. But if it was Makhachev, I still would probably favor the Dagestani to do what he does best.
I wonder if weight class is part of the discussion here as well. If you look at all the current champions, the lighter you are, and I guess maybe more energy you have over the course of 25 minutes, the more important it is to have the grappling. Like Merab, Pantoja has decent grappling. Then you have Topuria, who is a grappler or a wrestler originally. Then you have Makhachev. And as you go up, it's less important, because I think when you're bigger, you don't want to expend too much energy grappling, right? Because then you'll definitely gas. I wonder if that's part of it. But I think in the lower weight classes, it seems like you need to have some ability. Thanks everybody for tuning in, for listening. We appreciate all of the support, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode in a week's time.